As you very well know, we are amidst the beginning of a psychedelic renaissance. But there's wisdom that's in danger of being lost as our legal and medical institutions embrace these extraordinary medicines. Tonight, we sit down with Rachel Harris, PhD, to discuss her new book, Swimming in the Sacred, which offers a revelatory look into the lives and training of women elders who have worked underground guiding sacred and theogenic journeys for decades. If you're seeking psycho-spiritual integration through entheogens or other psychedelic medicine, tonight's podcast will give you a deeper perspective on the process, as well as strategies to use when considering a healer or guide. And it's all happening now.
You're listening to the MycoGeeky podcast.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the MycoGeeky podcast, the podcast that goes deep so you can level up your at-home mushroom cultivation game. I'm your host, MycoGeeky, and tonight, as I said, we're going to sit down with Rachel Harris. She is a PhD-level psychologist with 4 decades of clinical experience, including 10 years of academic research, where she published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals. She received a National Institutes of Health New Investigators Award, and after 35 years in private practice, she recently embarked on a research study exploring how ayahuasca is being used in North America, focusing on the process of psycho-spiritual integration. And as you guys know, this whole topic of integration, right? Like, first we grow the medicine, and then we use the medicine, and then there's that next part. Right? What is that next part? Well, you know, we're calling it integration. How do you take these amazing experiences, these mystical experiences, these spiritual experiences, these freaking mind-blowing experiences, and how do we learn from them, right? I think that's what pretty much every day when I start talking about this trip or that trip, or somebody says, "Hey, have you ever tried this?" And man, let me tell you about this this journey I went on. I feel like we're all trying to find the wisdom that we can bring back to our regular daily lives from these trips, right? So somebody like Rachel, she's very important. This woman has dedicated her entire professional life to psychology, to working in private practice with people, helping them heal, helping them grow. And as we're going to get to find out, she's got a background. She started out in the thick of it all back, you know, the heyday of psychedelics that we some of us have experienced because of our age, and other of us, you know, we just hear about. I kind of miss that. I feel like I'm getting older, but I'm not quite from that generation. So it was really great to get to sit down with her. Get her perspective. You know, she's been around a while. She has just perspective and wisdom and training, and she has worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over decades of time. And so her deciding to first write this book about ayahuasca. Let me grab it here. The Ayahuasca book, Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety. I'm just getting into the book now. And then the book we're talking about tonight, Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. David Presti says, this remarkable book is a narrative distillation of knowledge and insight, a source book of wisdom, jewels from medicine women. That's I've read it. It is. Yeah, it's a special book. So we're going to get into it here. We're going to find out why she wrote the book, what she learned from it, what we can learn from it, and how we can take some of that wisdom and apply it to our own journeys, whether we're going to journey, you know, ourselves, or we reach that part where we really need, you know, there are those roadblocks in that psycho-spiritual integrative process where we might want to pull a guide in and say,
what do I do? I don't know what to do.
So she kind of gives us a roadmap for that. I just want to read a little quote here from the book. She says, current psychedelic research is laying a foundation for how these medicines will be used therapeutically, with a limited number of counseling sessions to prepare, support, and minimally integrate the experience. These research protocols may be significantly different from the best practices developed over decades and decades of work by guides in the underground psychedelic community. It's very important that we don't lose their hard-earned knowledge. just everything about her in this book shows a deep reverence for the underground, the hard work that these guides have put in, the countless journeys that they've guided and what they've gained from it. But before we do that, I'd like to take a minute, about 12 minutes. We're going to pull on a couple friends here and see what they're up to and make a little announcement. So let's pull them in. All right, guys. Mandy Quark, Alan Rockefeller. All right. So, Mandy, Alan, you guys are in
Colorado
Colorado. Yeah.
Springs.
Oh, Colorado Springs. Okay, cool. Very cool. So, guys watching, Mandy reached out. She was like, "Hey, we're doing this trip. You know, the one you've been trying to raise some money to go on, and I think it's all happening, guys. So that's great." And she said, "Hey, why don't you find a couple minutes and we'll come on and we'll talk about the trip and try to see who else is interested in going." So why don't you just tell us, and then you got a little surprise here about the week before the Station 1 trip. Why don't you just tell everybody what your plans are and why it should be on the radar?
Yeah, so Alan goes to Mexico every year for like the last 15 years. And last year we did Station 1 in Oaxaca, but this year he recommended doing the Entheum Station 1 trip in Veracruz, simply because there's more mushrooms. And so, yeah, we're going to be down there for 2 weeks. So the week before the Entheum trip and then the week of Entheum. So I just figured, why don't we just make another foray the week before? So we're actually going to have two forays, both in the same region.
Right.
Yeah, and the first one is going to be more of just a general foray, just like our Ecuador trip was set up. Going out in the day, in the night. This region is known for its biodiversity in bioluminescent mushrooms. So it's like one of the highest, most hot, the hottest hotspots in the world for bioluminescent mushrooms.
All right, I paid for the night hikes at Nama. I'm gonna bring my flashlight where I'm gonna be ready. I'm ready for the natural bio Luma rave that's about to happen down in Veracruz. That sounds super cool.
So like the UV flashlights are for the fluorescent mushrooms, but then there's also bioluminescent ones which actually glow in the dark.
Oh, straight up, no flashlights required. Okay, you're taking me to Avatar. I get it now.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So I think your audience will probably be the most interested in our Entheum foray, which is Entheum is the Entheogen Genome Project. And Alan is on the board of that. It's a really cool group. They have like meetings every Monday. They're really involved they want to do full genome sequencing of psilocybe, especially wild psilocybe. So yeah, they were really late on planning their yearly trip, so I just kind of offered to help and plan it for them. Yeah, and then since we're going to be down there, we're also doing a foray.
Cool. So the first foray, that is kind of like a beginner friendly, let's go see what we can find. There's not necessarily a scientific agenda. It's just let's go roam around Veracruz, let's see all the cool stuff we can find. Whereas the second week is there's an agenda, we're on the hunt, we're looking for certain things.
I think the second week is more like a skill share. So it's supposed to be more like a community mycology skill share.
Gotcha.
So we're looking for people that are already into community mycology, whatever skills you would have, whether it's mushroom ID, mushroom growing,
Right.
DNA barcoding.
Bringing something to the table.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great. And then if, I feel like anyone could come to the first foray though, like all experience levels welcome.
Okay.
And we'll have Alan there to, just like help teach whatever people
guide us and guide us and teach us and that'll be great.
And then at Station 1 we're going to have a bunch of other local experts and then also people that are involved in Entheum doing talks.
Nice.
So we haven't really decided the exact lineup of talks for that yet, because they're going to vote on it
Okay.
in meetings. But yeah.
So it's all just being put together. But I talked to a few of the Ecuador people. They said it was amazing. They had a blast. It was, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but like life-changing or unforgettable trip in Ecuador. I am definitely anticipating the same level of trip for me. Hunting mushrooms in a hotbed region. Psilocybe is my favorite genus. I mean, I'm super, super excited. So for anybody watching, if you guys are looking to go on a trip, get your last little summer adventure in, consider coming down to Mexico. See what we can find.
And you can totally, there's no restriction. Like someone could totally come to both, um, if they wanted to, because they're going to be back to back, um, and not very far distance from each other. So yeah, if you have any hardcore
All
fans,
right, I do. All those
in
hardcore people out there.
2 weeks in Mexico, like just get 2 tickets. So importantly, I just want to mention, so you can buy these tickets to these events through our website, mycena.llc.
Okay.
Um, However, for the Entheum trip, the money is going to be PayPal directly to Entheum because it's
Okay.
all not for profit. Yeah, so
Cool. So here we go. So the first week, September 1st through 6th, Rainforest Foray series in Mexico, Jico, Veracruz, daytime and nighttime forays, mushroom photography and ID, tours by, so there's a local guy. He's going to take us all around.
Yeah, I've been hanging out with Rodrigo for a few years. Super cool guy. He's really sharp with the plants and mushrooms. He knows the area really well. He lives there. And so he's going to be guiding our forays.
That's great. I mean, the local, he knows the honey pots, he knows the topography, he knows where things are at. So you're just bang for your buck. You're not just showing up, wandering around aimlessly. We got a guy.
Also, super cool guy, like really nice to spend time with.
Awesome. All right, Rodrigo, we're coming for you. We're going to hang out. So then week 2, this is not just Mycena. This is not just you guys. This is also with Entheum Project. So you got Ian Bollinger, you got Victor, you got a handful of other people involved in that project. And the goal there is you're looking for certain psilocybe species, correct? You're gunning for some stuff, trying to sequence those full
yeah.
genome, right?
Last year we went and we did some DNA barcoding and we did it on site, actually in the rainforest. And it was really cool. It was really remote. So this the place is saying that they have Wi-Fi, they have electricity, so we should be able to do some DNA barcoding of the stuff that we find. And I think the big discovery from last time was there was a psilocybe. Uh, I can never say it. How do you say it? They had never found it at that elevation before, so that trip expanded the range of that species, like the known range.
Amazing. That's so cool. So guys, if you can bring something to the table, if you can barcode, if you're a good, field mycologist, IDer, well, if you feel like you got a little something to offer, station 1 is probably the way to go. If you just want to go have a good time, roam around, see what you can find, week 1 is probably the way to go. And like Mandy said, if you guys are hardcore and you really want to do both, we can probably make that happen for you. But again, so the price $1,500. It's for 5 days. Is that right? First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Oh, 6 days, 5 nights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're basically looking at like 300-ish, food, lodging, hanging out with cool people that know a lot about mushrooms. A good time.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of local people too. Like we're having really cool, interesting local people. Like I met some really cool, interesting local people that I would have never, ever, ever met last year. And the one guy that found that psilocybe last year, he lives in Mexico. So yeah, it's just really cool opportunity, and we don't know what we're gonna find, but it'll probably be something really neat. And then also, really, one quick side note about the Entheum Station 1 is I'm also really open because it's the Entheogen Genome Project. I would love to get someone in there to Skillshare about that knows about entheogens. So like the more spiritual side. Because I don't think we really had anyone like that last year. Yeah, like you don't have to be into the science, like someone that's more
The
into
cultural. Yeah.
entheogen or like,
Yeah.
yeah, like
Cool.
ethnomycology or something like that could be really valuable as well.
All right, guys, if you're listening, right, get creative. What can you bring to the table? Something to just make that trip as mind-blowing as I think it's going to be. Basically, all you had to say is me and Alan Rockefeller are going to hang out in Mexico and look for psilocybe. And I probably got a list of 10 people going, all right, we got to make this happen. So cool. All right. Well, yeah, I'll let you guys get back to, I'm sure you're going to find about 15 different mushrooms that have never been found wherever you're hopping around between here and that trip. So that'll.
He has something for you if you want to see it.
Yeah, we got a couple rare mushrooms that we just found today. This one is one of the destroying angels, so it's a deadly poisonous mushroom. And these are super rare in Colorado. They've
Oh,
only been
wow.
a few times. So
Yeah, look at that smooth cap.
yeah.
Gorgeous.
So I'm thinking it's going to be Amanita ameriverosa or Amanita subalacea. I'll send it to Kyle Kinnan for DNA barcoding, figure out exactly what that is. And then here's a new species of Amanita. This one doesn't have a scientific name yet, but Rod Talas is thinking about naming it Amanita cruentile murum, which means the bloody ghost. So it's the bloody ghost Amanita. You can see the red stains on here. Ghost because it's kind of like white in color, so it's real light in color with the red blood stains. And then this one, also super rare. This is Butribolitis. It's the first Butribolitis that's been found in Colorado. I didn't check Mycoportal or iNaturalist or Mushroom Observer, but it's the first one in iNaturalist for Colorado. Its species was described from Arizona about 20 years ago. But yeah, super rare here. We found all this stuff today.
Wow.
Around.
Found in Arizona and somehow made its way up to Colorado Springs.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, man, the boletes around here are everywhere. I'm tripping over them. I'm eating them every other night. All sorts of mushrooms. It's a good time right now. Getting me real excited for the NAMA foray, for this Mexico trip. So, guys, if you want to come hang out with Alan, Mandy, Ian, I think Jordan's going to be down there, all the gang, Geeky. All you got to do is just get at Mandy. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop in. I can't wait to see who decides to show up. It's going to be a good time.
It's going to be awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
All right, guys. So shifting gears. Here we go. We're doing it. I cannot tell you what a joy it was to interview this woman. So I couldn't be more happy to welcome to the show Rachel Harris, PhD, author of Swimming in the Sacred.
Thank you so much.
So I got to tell you, I honestly don't remember how this book showed up. People send me, hey, Geeky, you got to read this book. You got to read that book. Or, I'm always looking around. But anyway, it hit my radar. It reminded me of some books that I had read in nursing school about end-of-life care. I think the imagery just drew me in. It's a wonderful cover, and it's very poetic.
Thank you. That's hard praise.
Who doesn't want to swim in the sacred? We all want that.
The phrase comes from Maria Sabina, the Mexican curandera. She would sing during the ceremonies, and she would sing, "I am a woman who swims in the sacred." So that's where it comes from. The poetry is hers.
It's beautiful. So I read this book, and first off, it is exquisitely written. I have a little background in creative writing, so I always appreciate good writing. And the stories are fantastic. But what I really appreciated was how well you interwove, right? As I started reading the book, I thought to myself, she could have just went person by person. Like, here's Ariel, here's this person, here's that person. But you so magically interwove them all in those stories. And I think you accomplished this thing where instead of it becoming a just presentation of one person, you sort of created like an ethos for these women, right? Do you want to talk just a little bit about what you think the core ethos for these women were. What were their defining qualities, the trellis that you felt ran through all of them?
Yes, they are a unique bunch. And I was able to connect with them because I was in many of the same places with the same people they studied with back in the late 60s. I was there. But these women are unique, and I'm not unique in this way. I mean, they are not afraid of anything. They're afraid of nothing, I think is the way they put it. In contrast, I'm afraid of lots of things, pretty much everything. So I'm not of their ilk. They are like spiritual warriors, and so they were open and willing to take all the medicines at all levels of doses. And that's quite a learning in itself. So they really know the territory. And this is how they healed themselves. And so at the point where I actually had crossed paths with one of these elders, what is it, the late, it's like half a century ago. And she went this way and I went to graduate school, which is a very different path. And, I could not have done what these women have done. And their background is really that they worked on their own life issues and challenges using all these medicines. And then at some point, they began working with other people because they felt the medicines were so healing that they wanted to help, which is still something, I mean, that you described, this seeing the pain and the suffering and wanting to help. And so that's how they developed, and they found people to work with. And I just want to say one thing that comes up for me these days, because people, underground therapists, whatever, they say to me, I can't find a mentor. I can't find anyone. Well, I want to state very clearly that people are finding people to work with. It's sort of part of the spiritual journey is how do you find these people, because they're still underground. They're still working. I have referred people to the Women's Visionary Congress. You can find them if you Google that. You can find, and there are elders in that group. So it is possible to find people to consult with and to study with and to work with. And that's part of what makes this group unique is they spent a lot of time working on themselves and then learning how to work with these medicines.
Yeah. So what you're saying is I can't just go to 3-day workshop and come out a transformed, ready to guide anybody therapist. Okay.
Yes, yes. And people come up to me at conferences and say, "Well, I've been to a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, for instance, and now I'm ready to lead some ceremonies." And I'm just sort of speechless at that point. And I consulted one of the women, and she's one of the elders. And the elder said, people misinterpret the message they get. And it's an invitation from the plant spirit to study the plant, not to begin to lead ceremonies, but to begin to study.
Yes. We experienced that here in the cultivation community as well. The first flush looks great, and now they're ready to teach everybody. So yeah, I have seen that as well. Okay, so to go along, to kind of get a little bit into the apprenticeships, you have a chapter on the apprenticeship. So in chapter 3, Becoming a Sacred Guide, your guides present their apprenticeships as lengthy and subtle and nuanced, yet also very demanding and scary.
Well, see, that's my word, scary. They would never describe it as scary. That's the word I use.
But you do, okay, but you do communicate, I think, fairly, that while they are fearless warriors, the vast majority of us would consider that journey pretty scary.
Yeah, I think so.
You start making a distinction in this chapter between their experience and maybe some of the more cookie cutter training and workshops and certificates and all these kind of things. And then you link this to your professional and spiritual concern for the future of psychedelic therapy. So what do you think the decades of experience that these guides have bring to the table that like even a formal degree program can't bring to the table.
Yes, this is totally outside academic training. Only one or two of them had a therapy degree and were licensed. This is not about therapy. And I call them high priestesses. They really are sacred ceremonialists. Um, they're able to, because they know the territory so well, they're able to do two things that are really critical because they've traveled the territory to work on themselves. So they're very good at keeping themselves out of the person's journey, which is kind of one of the most important things to learn. I mean, in traditional psychotherapy, it's you learn how to manage your own countertransference.
Yeah, I would be bad at that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. In nursing, we have that. We talk about transference.
Yeah. Part of your job is to manage your own stuff that comes up. And Stan Groff, in his writing about, I think in his book, LSD Psychotherapy, he talks about countertransference. And he goes so far as to say that the client will pick up your countertransference, that there's almost like an ESP that happens between the two brains. And although that's not an equivalent, but that the client is in such a highly sensitive state, they can pick up the guide's difficulties that are coming up during the session. So that's one that you really have to have worked on your own self to be able to manage your own stuff that's coming up. And then the other thing is they're able to sort of track where the client is going in these realms. They know the territory of each of the medicines and they can follow with you. And this is in contradistinction to some of the guides I'm beginning to hear are saying, oh, I just need to take a little hit of the medicine, maybe a microdose or a mini dose, so that I can travel with the person. And I'm coming out strong. Do not go to someone like that. If they do not have enough experience that they can psychically travel with you, then don't go to them. They don't know what they're doing.
That's a good distinction. You talk a little bit about how careful these women are in when they're interjecting themselves, when they're choosing to speak, when they're not choosing to speak, and that only comes from decades of experience working with a mentor to help them understand when are you trying to interject
Because you're uncomfortable.
Yes, yes. So I think that's fascinating. And of course, if your guide is under the influence of these powerful substances, then they're on their own journey.
Yeah, and yes, and they shouldn't need that. I do recommend the book is online through Maps, and it's The Secret Chief Revealed. And it's about Leo Zeff. And I mean, if you want a how to book, that's the best book to pick up. And his position is less is more. Say less.
As a podcast host, yeah, I'm learning that myself. I'm always wanting to interject. And so, yes, I'm learning to do that as well. Yeah.
Right. And I know I would get anxious on behalf of my client. And I say, well, what's happening now? Where are you now? How are you doing? It's not helpful.
We do that when we trip with our friends, right? We wanna, or even if we're trip sitting for our friends, we interfere with their trips. What do you see? What's going? We do all that, and we're getting in the way of that. I always recommend people do that by themselves quite a bit before they decide to communally share trips. Some powerful things can happen from that, but initially,
I know this is the new generation that I'm hearing about. It's two things. It's people, as you say, tripping together, or tripping alone, home alone.
Yeah, utterly alone. Even DMT. I've heard about people doing this, and I'm like, man, no. As a medical professional, I'm always like, you need someone there, completely sober, observing what is going on at a minimum. At a minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes me very nervous. I mean, this was one of the original rules. Always have someone who's completely sober with you.
Right.
So, but I'm hearing it a lot.
Well, it's part of why I am so driven to do this podcast, because I feel like there are a lot of strong messengers out there, and I don't know how pure their intentions are. So yeah, I'm trying to message from a good what I think is a good place.
Some safety considerations.
Yeah. Okay. So in the book, you highlight the countless ways women are erased or at least marginalized from the history books. Their significant contributions often forgotten by most. This book was, for me, very clearly an homage to giving these spiritual guides a voice when, due to illegality, they got remained silent. So first off, just thank you for giving them a voice and a space. I think that's tremendous. I mean, just to do that is beautiful. I finished the book, immediately thought, how can I get you on the show? I want people to know about this book. I want people to hear about these women. Because right, we need the sacred guides, but we also need the Rachel Harrises that are celebrating those people, right? That's also very important. I think a lot of people that are watching my show are going through their own journeys, like you're talking about. They are earnestly going through their own healing process, but they are also, because of our cultural times, more quickly drawn to go, but I want to provide this for others. And so I think there are a lot of people who get a little experience under their belt. They want to start trip sitting. They want to start offering spiritual advice, things like that. Not everybody can quite figure out where to find some of these really expert guides.
Yeah, and I say, look harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the spiritual process, is the search.
Couldn't agree more. And you know, you can look for something, or you can just see the world, and instead of looking so hard, you can just see what's there. And sometimes the thing you're looking for, it's right here, but you're looking over there, and so you miss it.
Well, I want to give you a couple of examples of that. One of the guides just called me like a week or so ago and said she had received 2 emails from a stranger, someone she didn't know. And after she got the second email, she responded. And that woman had been working as an underground guide, and she had appointments set up. And she said, after reading this book and going to maps and seeing some of the presentations, she canceled people.
Ah.
Right? So she gave up income. She canceled people because she said, I need a mentor. I don't really know what I'm doing. And so she found this underground guide and started a relationship.
It's amazing.
And the underground guide responded to her because of that story. That was a real authentic story. That makes all the difference. It's possible to, in this day and age, to still find people. And I can give another example from one of the women who trained with an indigenous Shipibo shaman. So this was very traditional indigenous training. And after 6 years working with this shaman, he said, "You're ready to sing the Icaros," and working with ayahuasca. After 6 years of being in the jungle, and this is, just a real warrior, this woman. And she said, "No, I'm not ready." And so she sat next to the shaman, and she knew all the Icaros. She knew the songs. He would sing, and she would sing like a nanosecond right behind him. And then they could kind of compare what they're seeing in the client and see what the singing does, how the energy enters the body, what's in the body. And that went on for a whole year. And then she began to sing. And then when I interviewed her, she'd been working independently for about 25 years. So you get a sense of the depth of the training and the practice and the experience. And this does not happen with internet training courses.
Right. That actually reminds me, you told a story about one of the guides who you felt was maybe the most inexperienced, and you said she was the only one who actually talked about lacking confidence sometimes. And you correlated that,
And let me tell you, she's very experienced.
and yet still humble to the point of holding that reservation.
Yes, yes. It's the opposite of the current psychedelic inflation. This is the opposite. Yeah, but let me let me spend a minute on mushrooms. And Gordon Wasson, who everybody knows, but I can't remember his wife's name, Pavlona, or it's a Russian name. She was the mycologist. He was a banker. He was a finance guy.
You were blowing my mind with some of these the right? The other of all these famous people we've been presented, the stories of, and yet the real story, the full story, always included these very significant women.
Yes. Thank you.
I thought that was amazing. The patriarchy, we're going to be digging ourselves out of that hole for a while, unfortunately. But those little morsels, the front end of your book is full of these. I really felt like, okay, here's a woman who's like, I learned all these things that have to get out. I have to say them. Even though it's not specifically about some of these women, it contextualizes their importance. And so I thought that was so well done, so important to do that, but you were still very carefully weaving little bits of their story. So I didn't feel like I was getting this compartmentalized front end of like, okay, I got to teach you a history lesson and then we'll get to these amazing women. You were swimming in that zone very well, I felt like.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to actually reference the very end of your book because I think it's a great entry point to talk about something that was one of the most profound things about the book for me, at least from the point of view of authorship. I feel like you carefully wove this remarkable level of vulnerability into your book at different times, at key times. You were quite candid about your experiences with psychedelics, battles with your own health recently, and then your fear that you very bluntly would say kept you from really swimming in the sacred in the same way that some of these guides that you interviewed did regularly. Now, for me, the most haunting line, most clarifying line in the whole book came at the absolute end, and you were showing your gratitude for where I believe you're at right now, which is an island off the coast of Maine. Is that correct? Yeah. So, and then you ended the book by saying, when I'm not there, I long for the island's great beauty, dark nights, and silence. I'm a bit of a poetry lover. You had referenced in the Nominus, like capturing those Nominus moments. You wrote a little bit about how, I'm not creative at all. I tried to write a poem. And then at the end of the book, I'm like, oh, come on, give me a break. You just captured on that island just became this perfect metaphor for, you talked about a ketamine trip where there was this dark opening, and you talked when you were interviewing Anne Shulgin about her, embracing the darkness. And I mean, dude, I started tearing up. I'm still getting emotional, just it bringing me back to that place. But I mean, the sacred, the mystical experience as those scary cliffs, right? And I think so many people right now want spiritual depth. We live in a society that doesn't hold too many things sacred unless we're a part of a cult or seeped in religious practice, right? Otherwise, we don't hold too much sacred, yet people yearn for this. It's in our DNA to hold things sacred. So, I feel like that was so vulnerable. Could you just talk a little bit about, I feel like you made a decision. How much of me am I going to put in this book? How vulnerable am I going to be? How much am I going to ignore me and only talk about these women? So like, why the decision to be vulnerable, to contrast where you went versus where these women went? And, even to open up and go, I'm a wimp. I mean, one of your lines is like, I'm a wimp. I could never do this. These women are like soldier, warrior, priestesses. Yeah. So maybe just a little bit about how you came to decide how much of yourself you were going to put into the book and why you chose to do that.
I have a research background. I mean, I have a clinical and a research background. And the research background should have told me to have a scheduled interview. In other words, set questions that I ask everybody. And I decided not to do that. And what I wanted to hear is what they would tell me about their lives and their unusual commitment to dedicate themselves to an illegal life, because I think this is so unusual that a set of standard questions would not reach into their lives in the same way. And so we had these really intimate, heartfelt conversations that went on for hours, sometimes days, sometimes a whole weekend, phone calls back asking for clarification. The book came out of relationships with these women. Yes, some I interviewed for 1 or 2 hours. But most of them, it was a real ongoing relationship, and so I felt like I was part of it, and they had a profound impact on me. The process of meeting them and talking about these things really changed the way I hold reality. I mean, without any medicines involved, I'm not talking about a journey, just getting to know them and being with them and talking about their lives and who they are. I felt I began to shift out of my, modern Western cause and effect, materialistic, it's only real if you can measure it, time is linear. Things began to sort of get a little loose. And so I'm in that process now, actually. I feel of kind of getting out of the kind of trap of the Western modern training that I was raised in, I was educated in. I mean, and what's interesting is, of course, it approaches, some of the quantum physics stuff where nothing is solid and everything changes based on the observer, and yet that's not really part of our, that perspective on reality from quantum physics is not yet part of our culture. So I feel like, this, I'm in this book too.
You are. And importantly, when I finished it, I imagined, because I was like, wow, she put a lot of herself in this. I mean, I've never read a book where a therapist who 35 years of private practice is going to say things like, well, I'm a wimp, or I can't do that, or I'd be too afraid. It was very, at first I was like, did she do this because she had to say this to make them sound better? As the book went on, it was clear that this was an important thing to express.
This was my personal journey.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the funniest line is after spending 12 hours with the two women who are Native American. It's 9 o'clock at night. I'm getting ready to drive home for an hour in Arizona, where I don't really know the city, and I'm staying at a friend's. And they say, "Do you need to use the bathroom before you go?" Which is the standard thing women would say to each other. And my response was, "I don't know. I didn't
Yeah.
even know if I needed to pee or not."
You were somewhere else. Yeah.
I was somewhere else. And
Yeah.
that's when they took charge of me.
Yeah.
And they did some energetic clearing, and what a lesson that was for me as a psychologist and as a researcher, because I had sat with them for 12 hours in their dining room, and 8 feet away was the door to their ceremonial room that they never opened until I said, "I don't even know if I need to use the bathroom or not." And then they took me into their ceremonial room, which was all full of sacred shamanic objects and eagle feathers and rattles. And I was really in an altered state at that point. And they did energetic clearing so that I could drive home.
I'm so glad you just said that. That was the first moment. Page 28, out of the silence. I wrote this note when I read that little story. I wrote female energy, exclamation point.
Yes,
And,
it was.
and I'm like, that's exactly, because you made the decision to only seek out and interview females. I mean, not just because they're sort of, as you explain, a little subjugated or repressed or hidden, erased, but there's something distinct about that approach. It's a feminine energy. It's a feminine approach. I can't imagine you would be as likely to have had two male uh shaman guides who might still be also amazing and
Oh,
experienced,
absolutely.
but they're in their male energy and they're not in a female energy. So I thought that was I'm glad that one came up. Okay, I think this is a good time to talk about this. My absolute hands down heaviest part of this, I think the one that will haunt me is the story of Ariel's jaguar.
Yes.
Before I hope to have a bit of a dialogue on this one, but first, would you mind just retelling the story for the viewers and then kind of expand on the idea of living in more than one reality, how that informs the book's title, and then you sort of just mentioned how you sort of feel like you're in that space a little bit now, that nonlinear, what the heck is time anyway space.
Yes, and these women are definitely in that space. And that doesn't mean they're wifty. They can still be businesswomen and work in the consensual reality world, but they certainly know how to shift states of consciousness. This is a great example of one of the chapters is titled "What the Hell is Integration Anyway?" Because the Jaguar story covers 30 years. So she had this experience when she was on a vision quest, and she was sleeping just in a sleeping bag, no tent, on a mountain in Utah. And she woke up right at the beginning of dawn, and she felt a presence, and it was a large cat on her sleeping bag, looking at her, and she froze. And the cat swiped her with his claws. So she had an open wound from her hip to her knee. And she didn't move. The cat walked away. And she began immediately to talk to the spirit of the jaguar in her own visionary world. There were no drugs involved in this. This was a vision quest that's straight. She was maybe hungry, but no drugs. And so she began to talk to the spirit of the jaguar and had this position of humility that I think is really important for us. And it's, what can I learn from this? And she felt that she learned about fear with this experience. I mean, she's still in the sleeping bag, doing this inner work with the spirit of the jaguar. And she is someone who does not tend to be afraid. There are people like this, and this is not always a good thing. But she tends not to be afraid. But of course, fear comes up for many people during a journey. We're afraid we're never going to come back. We're afraid we're going to lose our minds. Fear, or we're reliving a trauma that's fearful. Fear is kind of standard to come up. And she felt that this experience taught her about fear and that she needed to learn about fear. Well, I'm pretty much freaked out hearing this story, of course. And then she goes on 30 years later. I mean, talk about integration and how an experience works on you. 30 years later, she's in another vision quest situation. So you get a sense of this is the story of these women's lives. Their spiritual life is prominent throughout their lives. So 30 years later, she's on a vision quest and meeting up with kind of her partner who's supposed to check on her. And they were all told to bring a gift for their partner. And the woman says, I brought a gift, but I didn't really want to let go of it. So it's in my car. This is quite a gift, right? I didn't want to give it to you. They go to the car and it's a jaguar. So here it is again on another vision quest. And so, the woman, the elder, the psychedelic elder accepts the gift, goes back to her spot in the vision quest and spends the next couple of days talking again to the spirit of the jaguar, writing in her journal. And it's this unfolding connection with this jaguar spirit, which is, very interwoven, this image with ayahuasca, of course.
Right. I think what I loved about that story so much, well, of course, it just grabs you right out of the gate because it's like, oh my Lord, can you imagine being in that situation?
No.
But that her instinct, the instinct is what was profound for me, is she, instead of going, that's just a wild animal that wanted to maybe kill me and eat me, she immediately said that was a spirit that came there for a reason.
She takes the position of a student. What can she learn from it?
Yes, I thought that was amazing. And then, of course, oh my goodness, another vision quest. And then the gift is, I'm just like,
jaguar. So so integration takes place over a whole lifetime. And this is as good an example as any that, you know, is sort of, as somebody said, you know, you travel around the mountain, but, you know, at different levels. So things repeat and come up, but in a whole different way. And so this was another jaguar that came to her.
Now, so the other thing that's interesting about that story is I have to imagine that only because she was a student, she was journeying, she was developing spiritually over these 30 years, that any of that meant anything, right? I could have had that experience and it could have been, let me tell you the cool story about the time I almost died at the hands of a mountain lion. And then, oh yeah, and the coincidence about, right? And then everything's just meaningless.
Yeah. And no, for her, it's the connection. And this is, of course, you know, when you have a relationship with this is a spirit animal at this point, then that's part of her shamanic and psychedelic power. And it's power because she's a student of it.
I agree. Yeah, I wrote, I said for me, the jaguar was the ultimate metaphor for our fear and the frightening nature of anything truly mysterious. But more than that, it was Ariel's fearlessness that was the most amazing part of that.
Yes.
Just so cool. All right, so you brought up the chapter, What the Hell is Integration? Anyway, one section, Preserving Numinous Experiences, which, by the way, for viewers, that's a fancy word for like mystical, mysterious, sort of sacred, sacred things, whether it's images, experiences, whatever. So you wrote of ways people can use their own creativity to preserve their memory of the mystical experience that they have when they're journeying. And you discuss how you employed a method one time after ketamine therapy, ketamine journey, where the ground opened up, earthly beings rose from the darkness to sing to you. You found photos later, so you're later looking for sort of some image to connect to that. And you found some photos of a Scottish cave that you said sort of didn't exactly match, but it had the same feeling of the earth opening up. And the photos brought you back to that exalted state of the journey. When I read that, I was like, oh, she's doing the Al Hubbard thing that she talked about earlier in the book. She's doing using the religious artwork.
Yeah. So
You're sort of doing that.
Yes.
And I was like, this is a tool. She just like,
oh, I should have connected that. I missed that.
To me, you connected it. I mean, you didn't point blank say it, but I thought very well you connected it. So I love that because so much of a psychedelic journey is imagery. Yeah. So when I was reading the Al Hubbard stuff, of course, thank you also for teaching me about that guy. I didn't know anything about that guy.
Oh yeah, so very important.
Now I'm checking that guy out.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
But again, he really also, I mean, you clearly respect that guy enough you spend a little time on him. But
I spent 6 months on him while I'm writing a book about women.
Okay, so because when I went to research him, I'm like, oh, she had to go deep on this guy because I couldn't quick do some Google searches on him.
No, it's hard to find.
But he did the same thing. He was all in.
Yeah.
He was all in. So anyway, the thing I want to ask you, based on those little moments in the book, could you talk a little bit more about the way the women you interviewed connected to numinous imagery, both in their own lifelong journeys and in the journeys of the people they guided? Like, did you hear them talk about... I mean, obviously, Ariel talked about the jaguar, but I'd love to hear a little bit more. I feel like there's maybe a couple stories that didn't make it into the book, because I think that's a profound concept. I think especially if you're only reading this book from the perspective of what can I glean from this to use for my own integration, I feel like this imagery is important.
Well, let me just start with myself, because this is not in the book, because it just happened like last week. Is I was watching Netflix, and there's archaeological documentaries, and one is on the Cave of the Dead, I think it's called. Archaeologists found a cave where our ancestors, not quite humans. Did you see it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And so they have the camera that goes into the cave. Well, that's another version of what I experienced on the ketamine trip. So there I am watching this, because this is just interesting anthropologically that this is a one of our almost human ancestors. They found another link in our uh, evolution, but they buried their dead deep in this cave. And so you really see from inside the cave, and you look up and you see the cave structure. And that put me right back in that ketamine trip. And I felt like that the ketamine trip, part of what I learned from it is that there's the reality of other worlds, and that who knows what happens when we die, and there are other worlds that we might go to. And here's this cave linked to the burial of the dead with these very, very early, barely not barely human
I mean,
ancestors.
really not human, they're
Yeah,
pre-human. Yeah.
who are burying their dead
Yeah.
in a ceremonial setting. And it's just, at this stage of life, at almost 77, of course, death is around the corner. And so some of these journeys have been an opportunity to prepare. And this Netflix documentary spoke to this ketamine experience.
Yeah. I thought what was fascinating for me is, anthropologically, there's sort of this view, at least by the common folks of the world, maybe not anthropologists or biological anthropologists, whatever. But there's this idea that if you believe in evolution and you're not caught up in some religious dogma, you believe that we were sort of monkeys and then all of a sudden we were people. And I love this documentary because it showed just how subtle that evolution must have been. And so this pre-human Homo, I forget which one
Me
it
too. I don't
is,
remember.
but that it was doing, a spiritual thing. That our earliest
They had a
intelligence,
religious ritual.
yeah, what our early pre-super smart versions of ourselves were spiritual before we were super intelligent.
So much of religion is centered around the mystery of death and what happens after, and how this includes all of our ancestors, and this is part of what it means to be human.
Yes. I spend probably way too much time. I always, for some reason, and when I do this, people think I'm so weird, but I always do before we were like we are now, I always spend so much time thinking about what tribal life would have been like and what concerns of the tribe would have been like. And how much of our DNA, really the last 400, but particularly the last 200 years, we have so radically changed our behaviors as Homo sapiens, right? Like 600, 700, 800 years ago, we looked the same. I think we were cognitively the same, but man, our daily practice was so different. It was so different.
Right.
So our DNA is informed by tens of thousands of years of one way of being, and now we're transcribed into this new way of existence, and it feels normal because we're born into it, and yet our DNA, that deeper knowledge, I feel goes, where am I?
Yeah,
what's going on?
And I think the challenge with these medicines coming into our culture is, how do we hold them? Well, so far we've held them as illegal, and we've held them as medical. But how do we hold them as sacred? We don't really know how to do that.
Yeah, when you brought that up, you just smacked me upside the head. I'm just like, that is the real profound conundrum that we find ourselves in. It is completely framed within those two contexts, and what we're losing because of that. It's almost nothing you can say about it. It's like telling people what it's like to see the Grand Canyon just, with words and a couple photographs. Like, you're just not there, swallowed up by the awesome, totality of it. And so we're doing the same thing. We're commodifying these experiences. We're going, well, unless we can prove medically these are significant, we don't care if they're spiritually significant. How do we not care that they're spiritually significant? That's crazy to me. But I feel like that is changing. Ketamine therapy is being used a lot. I sort of feel, from what I'm hearing from people so far, ketamine seems to be a lot like going to the chiropractor, where It's amazing. It's amazing. But if you stop doing it, you will lose a lot of the therapeutic benefit of it. That seems to be what I'm hearing from people. Like they say, and you actually, I think you mentioned this in the book, where they seem just profoundly transformed and then they get off the ketamine therapy program.
Well, I have heard this, that there's sort of a clamp, that there's a regression and a clamp down, that they open up during the ketamine treatment and immediately afterwards. And then,
Oh, yes. It was
you know,
framed as the therapist. Yeah.
the defenses. I have heard this from therapists. I think we're just learning how to use that drug. And I've been learning that when I'm talking to ketamine therapists, they call themselves psychedelic therapists, even though ketamine is not a psychedelic. They may have very little experience with entheogens, if any.
Yeah. Well, now, so you just brought up something that I had not written down that we talk about, but I think it might be worth talking about. So in Western medicine, the amount of medicine that is prescribed and used very strategically to cure people of disease or improve symptoms, the vast majority of practitioners have no experience with any of these medicines, right?
Right.
They don't know what ketamine feels like. They don't know what dilaudid feels like. They don't know what morphine feels like, fentanyl, you name it, all the stuff we use on a regular basis for pain. Most of these guys are young, fit, happy people, and have never had these things happen to them. And I have witnessed doctors who have. So for example, one of my attendings, she regularly gets migraines. So I would say the average attending a migraine patient walks through the door of the ER, and it's kind of like, okay, they're not going to die. So they will get prioritized much lower. She, however, does the complete opposite. She is almost sprinting into the room, immediately ordering the migraine cocktail for her because she knows exactly how it feels. And she wants that patient to have relief. She knows she can provide it to her with the migraine cocktail. And I see that all the time. That's just one example. Anytime anybody, whether, kidney stones, just the other day had a resident who had a kidney stone already at the age of 32, and he was just clearly more responsive, more attuned to where his patient was at. But I feel like you make a strong case in the book that this is a kind of medicine. It's very novel. Like it maybe really does require personal knowledge to effectively travel alongside and then later integrate those two experiences.
Yes. Let me say something else I just heard from the medical from a medical clinic for drug abuse, is that they're beginning to have professionals come in with ketamine addictions.
Oh.
So
You mean the people using it in their practice?
Doctors and nurses and therapists.
Doesn't surprise me.
So the psychedelics are not addictive. Ketamine is a dissociative that can be addictive.
Yeah, it's like, Netflix is a dissociative, right? It's a mild dissociative.
It won't kill you.
It's not going to kill me. It does disassociate me from things. So that doesn't surprise me that people are using it in that way.
Yes, yeah. Abusing it,
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a tale as old as time in the medical profession. The number one drug abusers I know. The anesthesiologists got their hands on all the good drugs.
10% of them.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
But that's going to be an interesting to see how we handle that, because I have to assume science is going to quickly have to reconcile the fact that this drug, it isn't like taking a blood pressure pill. You take it, your blood pressure goes down. When I was young, I took mushrooms before. It made me laugh. Occasionally some walls would wiggle around, but I wasn't picking my dose appropriately. I wasn't setting an intention. And so it was used recreationally. I did not have the same, it was fun. I liked it. I felt euphoric. But it did not feel like a profound drug to me as a young guy.
It's interesting. Yes. And I think this points to how these medicines, well, of course, so much is set and setting, but they bring us different lessons and experiences at different times of our lives. And I always like to point out that Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD, he died at 102, and he took his last LSD trip at age 97. So, the medicines initiate us in different ways at different stages of our lives.
It's so interesting. I have people, so I'm around a lot of psychonauts. I'm talking to a lot of people actively love to alter their consciousness, love altered conscious states. So anything they can get their hands on, right? They have extensive experience with DMT, with ayahuasca, you name it, everything. They got cacti growing in their backyard. They got the mushrooms. They're synthesizing DMT, everything. And these people will frequently talk about the novel characteristics of each one of these.
Yes, they're different.
They're different, even though now science is saying it's all kind of doing the same thing.
No, but we know they're qualitatively different. And with someone doing all that, I would always ask, well, how's the health of your relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine a blood pressure medication that worked differently based on how happy you were or whether you've healed your traumas, right? The fact that this medicine works differently based on who you are in that moment in time upon taking it makes it such a precious, unique, fascinating,
and mysterious.
Absolutely mysterious. Yes. All right. 35 years, private practice, academically trained, period of 10 years or, formal research, 40 papers, you're, as Alan Watts would say, potentially you're in the prickles versus the goo category. And now, have you heard of this? He describes people, he says, people are kind of two ways. They're either prickly or they're gooey. They're rigid people or they're like hang loose, dude, right? So much of your CV would suggest maybe that you're a little prickly.
No, that's misleading. Yeah. There's this story. Yeah. So when I was 21 and graduated from college in 1968, in the ancient years, I went directly to Esalen Institute in Big Sur for their residential program. So that was a program there were 11 of us in that group. It was 5-6 months, and we worked on ourselves with all the leading therapists and spiritual leaders who were around in 1968. So that was my foundation.
So your foundation was gooey.
Pretty gooey. And then I stayed on the staff on the massage crew, talk about gooey, for another couple of years. So then what am I, 23, 24, looking at graduate schools? There were no graduate schools that had this kind of a transpersonal, or I think transpersonal psychology hadn't even been invented or talked about then. So I was kind of at a loss. And so when I eventually did go to graduate school, I didn't want graduate school clinical training. I felt like I'd already worked with the top people in the world. And so I went into research. And so I escaped that corruption of the standard psychological training. And going into research, I had a woman mentor in research.
And so what year is that?
75.
So, I mean, you were pretty lucky. It would have been absolutely normal.
She was extraordinary.
To not have that.
She was extraordinary.
That grounded you.
So I wrote a grant using massage for depressed people. And NIH came to investigate, to decide whether they should give us money. And they came because they were interested in the idea, but they wouldn't give us the money. But that was like in the late 70s. So it was way ahead of time. So she was very open. And so that's what gave me the prickly foundation, right, but with great support.
So you're really a gooey person that sort of had to join prickly camp for a while.
And I was very lucky to find women mentors. As she developed a life-threatening cancer and gave her career up early because she was in the last years of her life. And in in our process of saying goodbye to each other, she said to me, "I always thought of you as a younger sister," and of course, I always thought of her as a good mother, but she. But you get a sense of there's clearly a familial relationship in an apprenticeship.
Yeah. That's lost. A lot of that is lost these days. I mean, I'm being taught at the hospital. We get we're trained on how to be empathetic, like through a 14-minute training module. I'm gonna teach me how to be empathetic.
Yeah.
It's so silly.
Good luck.
Yeah. Now, so I didn't mean to incorrectly label you prickly. I could tell you were not actually prickly, but you were doing some prickly things for a while. But
Yeah.
what I really want to know is, so you meet these women, you maybe knew some of them prior, you have maybe a super long history with one of them, and you get to know them again, very recently through all these conversations. You write this book. And now I'm assuming you're still in private practice.
No, I'm retired.
You are retired. Okay. So then I'm going to adjust my question. If you were still in practice, how do you feel the experience of writing this book might change the way you practice therapy? Would it make a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's I quote Jung in the book, who says the real healing is the approach to the numinous, to the spiritual experience. And that's a whole other level of healing than tell me about your mother. And I am proud of that basic work I did. Tell me about your family of origin, and let's go through that, because that's really necessary, and it makes a huge difference in your capacity for relationship and to loved ones, and your relationship to yourself. Absolutely, that's important. And there's this other level of healing that is about gratitude and awe and the approach to the numinous. So I want to say, I spent my life either as a therapist or a client or both. I have a Jungian therapist now.
Okay.
So yeah, and I tell her a dream and I tell her an experience, and so I feel like she's tracking my psycho spiritual movement. And
Interesting.
so I greatly appreciate her presence in my life. And I speak to her once a month. And yeah, and so I'm still in that process.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, that makes me think of two things. One, you blew my mind by telling me that Carl Jung
Yes.
had a trip sitter. I forget now, who was that?
Toni Wolff, another woman.
It was. Okay.
A woman, Toni Wolff, yeah, who's also neglected.
And that likely it radically and potentially completely informed the core of what made him
Yes.
a bedrock of psychotherapy. I mean,
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
That's a profound little slice of psychological history here that, man, I had no clue. I'd taken a
has been intentionally deleted from his memoir.
Oh,
Dreams, Memories.
He left that out, but then he wrote a later work.
No, the family cut it out.
Oh, the family did.
Because to be perfectly honest, she was a lover.
Ah, okay.
So, the family cut it out for obvious reasons. But
there you go. Okay.
But for us, we lose part of that history.
As I kept hearing these stories and the omissions of history, I'm just like, wow. And this woman is researching one book, with a focus, and she's illuminating all these little missing pieces of history. Dear God, how much of that must be out there? Just an onslaught of.
At Eleusis, in the ceremonies, it's the women who knew the recipe for the wine that was mixed with psychoactive plants. The women knew the recipe, which is all secret.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So in the chapter, what the hell is integration? Anyway, the section psychedelic therapists need psychedelic experience. You have a section in here where you say, new clients will ask you questions, new potential clients, and you say, I resisted my impulse to tell them they were asking me the wrong question. Instead, they should have asked me things like, do you sometimes laugh or cry during a therapy session? How many years have you been in private practice? Have you had therapy yourself? How many times? How long? Was it successful? Are you in therapy now? And first off, I was just like, wait a minute, let's go back to this first one. Do you sometimes laugh or cry during a therapy session? I cannot, even as someone who has had therapy for at least 20 years with 10 to 15 different people, the thought of any one of them being so connected to what was going on in the session that they might cry just had me sitting back going, wait a minute, so there are therapists who might be this connected to what's going on. I was
Absolutely.
so sad for myself. But more importantly, I bring this up because you said then, and I think this is important for the viewers who are considering working with somebody for integration, you can ask similar questions of psychedelic integration therapists or coaches. How many years have you yourself been working with these medicines? How many journeys have you taken? What medicines have you taken journeys with? Under what circumstances? How long have you been doing this integration work with others? Yeah.
You have every right to ask those questions. I want to empower people to ask those questions. And I remember telling one of the guides that not all therapists have had their own therapy, and she could not believe it. How can they be therapists if they haven't had their own therapy? Well,
I don't
easily.
know.
So,
I had a couples therapist once who it was so obvious she had lived the most wonderful, spectacular, well-adjusted life. And then just, I think her DNA was just happy. She just on every
yeah,
level
there is that.
seemed so well adjusted
Yeah.
to the point where I didn't mind it. I was actually like, teach us. we need more of this energy. Bring it to us.
Right.
But yeah, for the most part, we're all people. I mean, I never thought to ask. I would be honestly scared to ask most therapists that. But you're saying don't be. Ask that question. That's going to be a litmus test.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you spend a little bit of time. This is something I am constantly worried about. This renaissance, the psychedelic renaissance, which it's an interesting word, renaissance. Our the 1600s renaissance, we can fairly ascribe that word to it. It was definitely a renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
We might be using this word in a bit of a lofty way. It has
Well,
yet
this is
to be
Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan gave us the word. Yeah.
it has yet to be determined how much of a renaissance it's going to be.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed, but let's call it that anyway. There throughout the book, the cautionary tale of the role of integration therapy and the role of just these guides that you can go off in the spiritual wilderness by yourself. Some people, I do believe, can do that. I think there are people that can be their own guides to some degree.
They can do it until they hit an emergency.
Yeah, there are many people who can't, though.
And there's something very healing in having a guide there who is dedicated to your safety and well-being.
Couldn't agree more. Even these, we talked a little bit on one podcast, somebody had brought up in Eugene, Oregon. Now, it was the first therapy center, and I think $3,800. And everybody in my community was going crazy. Like, you got to be kidding me. I can teach you how to grow mushrooms for $100. Why on earth would you pay $4,000? And I said, look, they have a building, they have insurance, they have a medical director, they probably have a psychiatrist, they have a nurse. They have the building. It's a very safe environment, and there are many people that will need that at least for their first experience, and so that's fine. But these guides are not likely going to be hired by those places, nor will they necessarily want to come out of the shadows and work in those places.
Right.
Do you think that they hold a belief that if they were to come out and work in the mainstream, that they would somehow be at odds with what their core practice is?
I don't know, because I don't think I know enough of the current underground guide. So I don't know how to fairly answer that. But I do want to say is that these elder guides they are not working alone. In other words, they have collaborative relationships with medical doctors, nurse practitioners to ask about medical questions. They are embedded with therapists. They can refer to therapists. They have each other to consult with. They are not working alone, even though they look like they're alone in the underground. And so, this is also a question that you can legitimately ask someone you're thinking of working with. And that is, do you get any peer supervision? I mean, that's what it would be called. Do you consult with other guides? Do you have someone to call in case of an emergency? I mean, one of the most experienced guides, talked to me about an emergency that came up when she had to take the person to an ER. So, what do if this happens to some of the most experienced guides in the culture, what do you do in case of it? So, what surrounds that underground person working alone? And so that's also very important. I mean, yes, you can also ask a therapist, do you consult with, do you have a supervisor? Do you consult with colleagues? I mean, I had, a friend I know who was, the first person to call if I had a clinical question. I had a good friend I would call who's a clinical psychologist. And I did call him a bunch of times. And he would call me. I mean, this is what peer supervision and consultation looks like. And underground people need that also.
It's sophisticated. A newcomer wouldn't even be thinking these things. Somebody who went on their first ayahuasca retreat and is immediately going, "Oh, I could run a retreat." These are the things that is only informed by experience. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you also, I have a friend who's he's really part of the family now. He's been studying 6 years with a family of Shipibo shaman. So it's a younger brother, an older brother, and the older brother's wife. And they've been, I wrote about this in the book. They've been doing Zoom ceremonies, which blows my mind that this works. I mean, first of all, where they sing. I mean, don't even get me started on that because I still can't believe it. And it really helped me heal after, this 5.5 hour surgery I had.
Right.
But as I've gotten to know them, with my friend who's the translator, basically, I realized they do case consultation before the ceremony. The three of them get together and they talk about who are we going to focus on? What's the order of the patients? What are we doing? And it's just like you do, with nurses, when there's a change of shift, there's a little meeting and who's doing, who do you have your eye on in what room? So someone working in the underground alone, you want them to have that kind of professional approach.
I do. I do want that. You should. Anybody watching should want that. I think it also speaks to something you get into the book a little bit about, which is the dangerous territory of how. So, as a nurse, I experience professional intimacy on a daily basis. I can just meet you. 2 minutes later, I can be inserting a Foley catheter. I can be providing an enema. I can be even at the basic level. I'm stabbing you with a needle to start an IV, right? And I'm touching you and I'm right next to you and we're looking at each other and it's professionally intimate very quickly. And the training I had as a nurse taught me ways to respect that professional intimacy and how vulnerable it is.
Yes.
Man, as a guide, I mean, it doesn't get much more vulnerable than going on a trip with somebody you potentially don't know in regular life. You've been brought to them. And so I forget which guide it was.
That was Rada, a dear friend of mine. And yeah, she did the traditional training with one of the most powerful Shipibo shaman. And when she found out that he was abusing Western women, she confronted him. And he said, "But it's so easy."
What?
Yes, this is a real confrontation with psychopathology. And that's when she knew he wasn't really going to stop, and she left him. And that takes courage to leave someone who's one of the most powerful shaman, because it's never the end of an energetic relationship. But she left him immediately, and she had some colleagues who were also studying with him, and it took them a little bit longer to leave him, like another couple of months or so. But she was like, that's it for me.
Our humanity never leaves us. There's always that potential. I think you, in several instances, really caution everybody about the power of that relationship, that role as a spiritual guide. And in my head, I'm going, never. Like, really? You can become this high level shaman? How on earth could you ever do that? But
Oh,
obviously,
please.
it
We
can
also we
happen.
already have problems with psychologists and
Yeah,
all kinds of
true.
professionals. Yeah, so everyone needs
Shocking.
to be very careful. And one of the ways that the indigenous women handle this situation with the shaman in that culture is they're never alone. They always bring a female relative or a friend. They're never alone with a shaman.
Interesting. I mean, we do that. We do that in the hospital as well, right? Like, if we're doing a pelvic exam, the doctor
Yeah,
asks for a witness. It doesn't matter if it's a female doctor with a female patient. There
yeah,
is always someone else. Yeah,
yes.
and
And
we know these
it protects both people.
protects both people, 100%. Yeah. I wish these things were not true, but they're true. I mean, it's like Ann Shulgin said, right? You gotta acknowledge your beast. And hopefully form a relationship with it, so one day you don't turn into that guy who says, but it's so easy.
Yes. That's chilling, isn't it?
That's very well, yes, it's chilling. I have personal reasons why that's just extremely
Yeah,
chilling and sobering for me.
right.
But yeah, I know people who have experienced those violations, and they just, they can't be undone. It's like
I
just a
agree.
moment in time, and then it just can't be undone, and what it can do to the psyche. And
I'm giving a talk on ethics, and that's one of the things I want to be clear about, is that this is damaging and cannot be undone. That's exactly the core of what I'm saying to these new practitioners.
very important.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
See a little bit of that. I've seen that in the hospital. The busy doctor comes in, wants to take a look at how a wound is healing, rips the bandage off or pushes around, and just shows a bit of a disconcern for the patient and causes the patient pain, and then the patient gets very angry and is like, "Who the heck are you? Think
Yeah.
you can walk in here and poke me around?" And I mean, that's a simple version of that. These much more violating permanent experiences, just anybody in those settings where you have some degree of power, you have to have a deep respect for that. You talked about that.
Well, you've heard me emphasize the learning from the plants, from the medicines. I think that that maintains an attitude of humility.
Yeah,
And I think that's possibly an antidote to going down that path of abusing people,
true.
using the power in that abusive way.
Here it is. Becoming a Psychedelic Guide, Basic Rules for Guiding, from Leo Zeff work.
Oh,
The
yes.
Secret Chief. They will not leave without my clearance. And then Medrith, hers was step one was, you're putting your life in my hands and I have the final say so. That, I believe 100% is a requirement of working with one of these guides, but then at the same time, that is exactly why that cautionary tale is so important.
Yes, it could go the other way. That's correct.
Which sadly, I hate to be this guy, but the vast majority of sexual abuse and sexual violation does sit squarely on the lap of men. And so this would also be a reason to celebrate and honor female guides who are, just to play simple mathematics, much less likely to make those violations.
That's accurate.
Yeah, unfortunately. Nobody wants to professionally sit back and say, don't go find a male guide. But if any part of your decision-making process, I will just speak for myself. If any part of your decision-making process is concerned about those things, if you have past history that makes that a particularly touchy subject, I think it wouldn't be the worst idea to seek out a female guide as a starting point.
I have a problem. There's a well-known case in California of a female guide entering into a sexual relationship with a client.
Okay.
So there
All
is
right.
it's a smaller percentage.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying
It's a
I'm a
small-
statistics guy, so
It's
I
a
like to play
smaller
the
percentage.
numbers.
It's true. It's a smaller percentage.
Yes.
And just to add to your playing the numbers, gee whiz, there is a pattern when a male. This is data based on. I'm hesitating because I think it's a. Gee whiz, I think I'd have to look. I don't think it's just psychologists, but I think it's psychologists, social workers. I think it's therapists in general, more than one discipline. But yes, the men are much more likely to be a perpetrator. And gee whiz, they choose to be sexually inappropriate with women who are 10 years younger. I'm sorry. It's not a joke. It's not a joke, but it's
I'm a
just-
man. There's a simple explanation for that.
Exactly.
I just wanders. What are you gonna do?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't need to interpret that data.
There's no interpretation necessary.
Right.
Yes. I mean, but there's a simple. If you're a young woman, you should be on your toes. You should never let, like you were just saying that some of your Rada's friends took a lot longer to leave that guy, even though he, was
The
becoming
men.
it was.
Yes.
Oh, it was the men who were slower
The
to
men
leave.
took
Oh, of
longer.
course, because it was not directly as impactive on them. Yeah, sure, okay. All right, well, let's go. We should have started with the negative instead of ending with the
Yeah, can we
negative.
end on something positive?
Yes, let's end on something extremely positive.
Oh, good.
So in Psychedelic Ways of Knowing, Love the World, you bring up a little quote from Yonggi Mingyur Rinpoche. I have never heard of this person.
I hadn't either. Everyone should buy his book. I think the title is In Love with the World.
We'll be doing that because I am a bit of a quotation lover. Like I would say quotes are kind of one of my hobbies, and I'd never heard this one, though I feel like the idea's out there, but it was said so well, which is, when you love the world loves you back. And I don't know when he wrote this, but it's kind of like the invitation that was such a big deal, right? For a while, the invitation, if you put it out into the universe will give it back to you. But it was never framed. It was never framed about love. It was framed about getting everything you want. Like, you want $1 million house, then you just put it out there and you're going to get it.
He's all over. You can find him on YouTube. He gives lots of talks. He's quite a prestigious Tibetan monk.
Yeah, that one right there, because you're really focused on these women and what makes them amazing and important and the work they're doing so sacred. But of course, at the end of the day, you have to always go, okay, but why are we doing all this? Why should people do this? And it seemed to me like you were really getting at coming to terms with the world and, our existence in it, and
Yes.
how important the relationships are. Time and time again, you're reemphasizing whether it's the apprenticeship relationship, the seeker of the journey, even you as the author, and then, me or anybody else as the reader of the book. That's a relationship. The way that you came to that is also clearly very generous and kind. So I think that's what a lot of people in my community are constantly echoing to me, which is they want to love, they want to be loved, they want to re-render their relationship to the world, which maybe started off very scary and traumatic. Mm-hmm. And then through this medicine, they're able to reunite, or more accurately shed, baggage that allows them to just see everything and connect with the jaguar and the mountains and the cliffs off a small island off the coast of Maine, right? Just to be connected to the earth we live on.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. The book is amazing. Guys, if you're watching the show and you're remotely interested in this stuff, if you're searching, if you're healing, if you've ever considered consulting a guide, you got to read this book. If you simply just want to hear more about these women, I mean, you did this very well. You wrote the book both for people who are actively seeking guides. I think you celebrated them in a way that makes it pretty undeniable they're worth finding. But then also you wrote it in such a way that somebody who doesn't even want to use this medicine, doesn't feel called to use this medicine, still would gain quite a bit from understanding what these women are doing and why it's important. So I think you did that very well.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, can't wait for the next book. You also have another book I've not read yet. I will be reading it. And that was, what was your ayahuasca book called?
Listening to Ayahuasca.
Listening to Ayahuasca. So you guys, if you've ever journeyed on ayahuasca or you're considering it, Rachel's got an amazing book, highly reviewed. Lots of people like it, so give that a gander. I have all the links in the description for how to get your hands on any of her books. Can't wait to see what you write next.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, guys, that was Rachel Harris, PhD, author of Swimming in the Sacred, right here. Go buy it, man. We all got Amazon, right? None of us read enough. I sure don't. You guys probably don't. This book is wonderful. Swimming in the Sacred. I think that's what we're all trying to do. And then if you guys are interested, going beyond psilocybin, listening to ayahuasca, New Hope for depression, addiction, PTSD, and anxiety. I talk to a lot of people in this community. Most of us got at least one of those things, if not several. So, if you haven't considered an ayahuasca retreat or ayahuasca ceremony, read her book, see what she learned in her research process and her own personal journey with ayahuasca. I think anybody that's been considering it, the book would be a great starting place for sure. Anyway, man, just mind blown. Like all these little tidbits of information, really couldn't be more appreciative for people like her who are doing the research, illuminating the lesser known parts of history in the psychedelic space. Really just a wonderful addition to our community, and can't wait to see what her next book is going to be all about. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. Hope you guys learned something. All right. And like she said, the women guides of the psychedelic underground have been in relationship with these medicines for decades, providing a sacred container for entheogenic journeys. She says, we need to hear from them now more than ever. I couldn't agree more. So I hope you guys consider checking the book out. I really enjoyed it. All right, guys. So no matter if you guys have been growing mushrooms for decades, you just started a year ago, you've been growing mushrooms for a week, or you're sitting there waiting on your first flush, I wish you guys well, and I'll see you next week.